כי ביום הזה יכפר עליכם, לטהר אתכם מכל חטאותיכם. Because on this day, because through this day will atone for you, to purify you from all your misdeeds. Such a privilege to see your faces as I take another moment through the gallery view, to see you, to wave, to appreciate each of your presences here. Closing my eyes to picture us together in the main sanctuary of our Bayit, and appreciating the way in which we've created that sense of togetherness through showing up, through Zoom, through reaching out, through holding each other in this time. And I flash to 6 months ago when I sat at this table to share words with you on Shabbat HaGadol. So many things were different. The sense of Hagadol, of magnitude, of massiveness that I felt on Shabbat HaGadol was the magnitude of the pandemic and its daily impact on our lives. The magnitude of the number of deaths, the magnitude of the limitations, restrictions that we were feeling. We couldn't see past the next funeral. We were more or less in complete lockdown. There's still so much to wrestle with, so much to grieve. But now we're upon Shabbat Shuva. Shuva Yisrael. Return, O Israel. It's a time to try to see past the gadol of the pandemic, even as it is deeply, deeply still with us, and to think about return, about teshuvah, each in our own pace and each in our own way. And like the process of teshuvah, we know that we never return to the way things were. We don't look backwards in teshuvah. We look forwards. We look to how to build a better self, better household, better community, a better world. And we appreciate the power of teshuvah, articulated by the sages as a transformative act so powerful that zidonot na'asu lo lizuchuyot, that even willful transgressions, that even conscious mistakes and wrongdoings can be transformed to actions of merit. And in the wake of all of this loss and this pandemic, my prayer is that the process of teshuvah, of returning forward for us, will be to build a tighter, stronger, more conscious community, not just of our Bayit, but of our Bronx, of our country, such that the things that befell us this time around, if we ever faced conditions like these, we would be equipped to find them as opportunities to deepen connection, to see how far we've come, to strengthen and hold each other. And for many of us, our Shuvah moment, our moment of returning to community and tefillah, was just this past Shabbat and Sunday, Rosh Hashanah. And we've been blessed as a Bayit team, as have so many other sibling congregations and communities, to feel the gratitude and appreciation from each other for the opportunity for those who came in person to be back together, to return, and for the opportunity for those who were at home to be connected to us and we to you through letters and writings and thinking about each other. Rosh Hashanah in many ways I feel was successful. Now we look forward to Yom Kippur. The stakes are even higher. Yom Kippur is a day that we spend typically entirely in shul. It's a day in which we depend on being able to sit focused, talit around us, sidur, machzor in hand, introspecting, singing, and connecting. And this Yom Kippur, even those attending in-person services won't be there all day. And it's likely to rain. We don't even know if we will be able to daven together. So many of us won't be present in person. The tastes of Rosh Hashanah could remain even under these circumstances. But how will we feel Yom Kippur when we can't all be in shul together in the way we have been accustomed to? How can we create a sense of the day without its usual markers and milestones and context? On Rosh Hashanah, wherever we were, we hopefully heard the shofar. We hopefully had a Yom Tov meal. But on Yom Kippur, if we're rained out or staying at home, what will make it Yom Kippur? What's the nature of this day? How can we capture it even at a time which is so radically different than any Yom Kippur we have ever experienced before? This is the challenge I want to take up with you tonight. The question I want to try to answer. And I want to argue that Yom Kippur has something in its essence that we will be able to capture whether we're rained out or not, whether we're in person or not, whether we're davening together or not. I want to explore this idea of the essential nature of Yom Kippur that transcends all of its familiar activities by noticing that the Torah, the sages, and our medieval sages all recognized something unique to Yom Kippur, something about its quality as a day that requires almost no action or activity to feel, to obtain, and to achieve. That Yom Kippur is somehow a day that works its magic, whether we're in shul or not, wearing a kittel or not, perhaps even fasting or not. We're going to see that idea expressed, the description of that idea, that Yom Kippur has an essential nature that somehow achieves its goal no matter what we do. And then we're going to try to dig deeper into that nature and ask, where does it come from? What gives Yom Kippur this magic? A quality we can tap into no matter what this Monday looks like. What I hope we will discover is that Yom Kippur is a singular day in the year, which combines covenantal consciousness, an awareness of our bodies, a focus on justice, and a sense of relationship between self and community. Covenantal consciousness, an awareness of our bodies, a focus on justice, and a sense of relationship between ourselves as individuals and our communities. These four elements are inherent to Yom Kippur, no matter what we do on this day. And we can achieve them, feel them, and enact them, no matter where we are, no matter the weather. So let's begin. Source one is a pasuk which I sang to you and which goes all the way through our liturgy on Yom Kippur. Ki vayom hazeh yechaper aleichem letaher etchem mikol chatoteichem lifnei Hashem titaru. The translation here, for on this day, God shall atone for you. Ki vayom hazeh, on this day, yechaper, God shall atone for you, to cleanse you of all your sins. Before the Lord you shall be clean. That is to say, Yom Kippur, this is from the Yom Kippur morning Torah reading, Vayikra chapter 16, the pasuk that is essentially the motto of Yom Kippur. It's upon this day that God will purify, atone for us, cleanse us. This is the day for kapara, a kapara that comes from Hashem. But the Midrash notices the sense of Bayom Hazeh, And it explains, Ki bayom hazeh yechaper alechem b'korbanot. What actually achieves this atonement? Maybe not just God, but the sacrifices that we offer on this day. The bulk of chapter 16 describes the elaborate and nuanced and complex rituals that the Kohen Gadol does, which we are not removing from the Musaf service that will be abbreviated this year. We're keeping it in because it's so central to the day to feel ourselves with the Kohen Gadol in the Beit HaMikdash on Yom Kippur. That's what achieves the atonement of the day. But the Midrash goes on. Uminayin she'af al pi she'ein korbanot ve'ein sa'ir hayom mechaper. But what if the world we live in doesn't have a temple, doesn't have the offerings, doesn't have the special atoning he-goat? And I would say, what if it doesn't even include those prayers in the service of the day? What if we make no mention of all of these things? Hayom mechaper. Somehow the day itself, waking up on Monday, living through the 10th of Tishrei, achieves the atonement. Talmud lomar ki bayom hazeh yechaper. For on this day God shall atone, or perhaps as Rav Soloveitchik read it, ki bayom hazeh yechaper. The atonement happens through this day. The day itself atones. Averot sheben adam lemakom yom hakippurim mechaper. V'sheben adam lechavero ein yom hakippurim mechaper ad sheyiratze et chavero. Of course, there are limits to the power of the day itself. Because it's Bayom Hazeh Yechaper, God atones, so God can atone for us on the day itself, or the day itself can atone for transgressions between us and God. For transgressions between ourselves and our neighbors, of course, we need that interpersonal connection. We need to sort through those issues to then arrive at the day and allow the magic of Yom Kippur to do the last piece of the work. This is the sense that the Midrash opens up to us from the Pasuk, that Yom Hazeh Mechaper, there's something magical to Yom Kippur that achieves at least a piece of the atonement, at least the atonement for sins between us and God, just by waking up, maybe not even by showing up, just by living through the day, some atoning power is transferred and created. The Gemara develops this idea further in the next source and takes an even stronger stance about the possible power of the day, as we look at this Gemara from Yoma. The Mishnah says that Mita v'Yom HaKippurim mechaprim im hatshuva. There are different things that achieve different kinds of atonement. Death atones and Yom Kippur atones, each of them when accompanied by repentance. And the Gemara explains this Mishnah, im hatshuva in, bifnei atzman lo. The power of death, the power of Yom Kippur, is that they atone, but only with tshuva. If you don't have tshuva, Yom Kippur doesn't achieve anything on its own. Nema de lo kerebi. So let's assume, therefore, that this Mishnah doesn't follow the opinion of Rebbe, because Rebbe says something absolutely mind-blowing. Titania, Rebbe Omer, al kol averot shebatorah, bein asa tshuva, bein lo asa tshuva, Yom HaKippurim mechaper. Chutz miporek ol umegale panim batorah umefer brit basar. Shim asa tshuva Yom HaKippurim mechaper, v'im lo asa tshuva ein Yom HaKippurim mechaper. So we assume that this position of the Mishnah, that Yom Kippur atones together with tshuva, can't be Rebbe's position. Because Rebbe says for every sin in the Torah, with just a couple of exceptions, whether you do tshuva or not, Yom Kippur atones. In other words, the power of this day, whatever it is, and we don't know what it is yet, we only know that it is. The power of the day is so enormous and extraordinary that when you wake up on Yom Kippur, whether you did tshuva or not, and the kinds of wrongdoings are not differentiated here. So if you wronged a friend, even if you didn't reach out to them and repair, you wake up on Yom Kippur and you're atoned, because there's something embedded in the 10th of Tishrei that achieves that power. This is the, as I said, mind-blowing opinion of Rebbe. And I would say about it that it's as unsettling as it is powerful. Why should that be the case? It's like it doesn't feel Jewish, this easy out that the day itself accomplishes it. We have paradigms like this, like bar and bat mitzvah. We often talk about becoming a bar and bat mitzvah or making a bar or bat mitzvah as though the aliyah to the Torah or the chesed project or the Dvar Torah or the party is what makes a person a bar or bat mitzvah. But we know that's not the case. Waking up on the day, turning 13 or turning 12, makes a boy or a girl, respectively, become obligated in the mitzvot. And not just that, by virtue of that, become able to help other people fulfill their obligations in mitzvot. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be particularly mature, sophisticated, or thoughtful. By waking up on the day of your 12th or 13th birthday, you become a bar or a bat mitzvah. So we have a paradigm like this in Jewish tradition, that simply the arrival of a day creates this transformative status. But it doesn't feel like that should apply to the situation of tshuva, which is so much about undergoing a change in ourselves, becoming a different or a better person, or returning to our truest selves. How can a passage of time or waking up on a day achieve that for us? And indeed, we don't rule in accordance with Rebbe, but he's articulating to us something very, very deep about what this moment in time, just by being, can be. And we'll come back to the possibilities of how that could be the case. So up until now, we've seen that there is some sense from the pasuk, Ki bayom hazeh yechaper alechem. On the first reading, it's a sense that on this day is a day designated for God to atone if we do all the things we need to do. Then we start to interpret that even without the sacrifices, even without the temple service, maybe even without the tefillot that represent them today, something of the day itself achieves this transformative change in our lives, even if we don't do all the things we might have thought we needed to do. The day does something. Yom hazeh mechaper alechem. It's not even God who is atoning for us. The day atones. The Rambam takes us to the next step in source 3. The Rambam rules like the sages and not like Rebbe, that we need shuvah in order for the day to do its magic, but the day still does some kind of magic. And the Rambam, in expressing this, adds a word, which helps us understand something of what we need to get to figure out what Yom Kippur is all about. You can see how he's building off of the midrash that we saw. Bizman hazeh she'ein beit hamikdash kayam ve'ein lanu mizbach kapara, ein sham ela tshuva. Right? So in the time that we don't have the temple anymore, we don't have the atoning altar. These are the questions that the midrash asked earlier. So how can we achieve atonement? So the day achieves atonement. Says the Rambam, tshuva achieves atonement. Ha-tshuva mechaperet al kol haverot. Afilu rasha kol yamav, even someone who is an evildoer all of their life and repented in the end, none of their wickedness is held out against them. As the pasuk says, as for the wickedness of the wicked shall not fall thereby in the day of turning from one's wickedness. On the day of shuvo me risho, on the day of tshuva, all that wicked wrongdoing falls away. It doesn't trip us up and it doesn't hold us back, and we're ready for full atonement. Itzumo Shel Yom HaKippurim mechaper lashavim. And now, alongside the tshuva, there's something else that's needed to achieve the full atonement. And it is, according to the Rambam, Itzumo Shel Yom HaKippurim. Shene'emar, Ki bayom hazeh yechaper alechem. Okay, let's unpack this for a minute. So the Rambam has now not just said what the pasuk said or the midrash said, that Yom hazeh mechaper alechem, that the day atones. The Rambam feels the need to add a word here, Itzumo Shel Yom HaKippurim, the very day, sometimes the self-same day, and we're going to see some other possibilities. For Rambam, it's not just that the day atones. That would be Hayom hazeh mechaper, Yom hazeh mechaper alechem, yechaper alechem. The Rambam needs to add something about the day atones. It's actually not the just waking up on the day. It's not the turning of the calendar. It's a quality of Yom Kippur that we need to understand in order to be able to somehow utilize it. Yom hazeh mechaper is not enough. Itzumo shel hayom mechaper is what's necessary. The essence of the day, the heart of the day, the very nature of the day atones. And so we need to figure out what that nature is in order to understand how to make the most of Yom Kippur and how Yom Kippur can be what it needs to be for us, even without shul, even in the rain, even without davening together. And as soon as we see the word Itzumo Shel Yom Kippurim, we realize that even though the proof text up until now has been Ki bayom hazeh yechaper aleichem, there's another text hovering just beneath the surface. It's source 4 from Vayikra Chaf Gimel, Parashat Emor, the portion that tells us about the nature of the holidays, not just their sacrificial responsibilities, not chapter 16 that focused on all the cultic temple activities of Yom Kippur, but chapter 23, which tells us about the themes, the ideas, actions, and nature of each of the holidays. And as it talks about Yom Kippur, it says the following. You can just look at the bolds to know where we're going. But on this 10th day of this month, this 7th month, the month of Tishrei, Yom Kippurim hu mikra kodesh yelachem. It's a sacred occasion. It's a day of atonement, a day of practicing self-denial, bringing an offering. Do no work throughout the day, because it is a day of atonement, to atone for you before the Lord your God. Any person who doesn't practice these afflictions throughout that day, they are somehow separated, divided, cut off from their nation. There's a heavy sense here, which we will come back to, about being cut off from the community when we don't participate in some way in Yom Kippur. And so now we have this sort of interplay between the essence of the day itself, Etzem Hayom Hazeh, and some sense of connecting, participating in the day, whatever that might be, in order to prevent us from being cut off from the rest of the community. The phrase Etzem Hayom Hazeh appears 12 times in the Chumash, from Bereshit through Devarim, and only about a handful of times in the entire rest of the Tanakh. And we could have spent this shiur together, this drasha together, studying and comparing the places it appears and what we could learn from them. It appears in the story of Noach. It appears in the story of Abraham. It appears 3 times in chapter 12 of Exodus in the story of Pesach, all these covenantal moments. It appears twice in Shavuot. But here is the ultimate concentration of the idea of Etzem Hayom Hazeh. 3 verses, 3 mentions. A full 25% of the appearances of this phrase in the entire Torah rest right here, in this handful of psukim, in these 3 central psukim about Yom Kippur. So we know already from the Torah that something about Yom Kippur is it being an Etzem Hayom Hazeh, a day which is essential, which has an essential nature. It's still not even described here, other than telling us that it has afflictions, that we rest from doing work, and that it's a day about being sure that we're not divided from the rest of the community. But otherwise, we still haven't gotten to the heart of what it is. We just know that it's a day that's defined by being an Etzem Hayom Hazeh. And now we know why the Rambam couldn't just say Yom HaKippurim Mechaper, or Lev Yom HaKippurim Mechaper, the heart of the day, or the theme of the day. He had to say Itzumo Shel Yom Kippur Mechaper, the essence, the very day, because he was reminding us that Yom Kippur is a day that's defined by the Torah as Etzem Hayom Hazeh, as a day which is somehow linked to Etzem, to self-sameness, to essence, to Etzem. And so the key to the power of the day is to understand the term Etzem. And we already see this shift from Ki Bayom Hazeh to Etzem Hayom Hazeh in this medieval period, as we see evidenced in source 5. And there's something going on here which I haven't fully gotten to the bottom of, which is this shift from the midrashic focus on Ki Bayom Hazeh to the medieval focus on Etzem Hayom Hazeh. By the time of the medieval period, and certainly on beyond that, we start to talk about this idea of Itzumo Shel Yom Mechaper. We no longer say Hayom Hazeh Mechaper Aleichem, but we say Itzumo Shel Yom Mechaper, so much so that in my first read through of various articles and descriptions of this idea of Itzumo Shel Yom Mechaper, the essence of the day atones, I was sure that it must be in the Gemara or the Midrash. And I haven't found it yet. If you do, please let me know. But thus far, it seems to be something which comes up only in the medieval period. And after we see this one example, I want to speculate about why for a moment, and then try to understand this etzem, and what it means for us about making Yom Kippur, no matter what this Monday looks like, weather-wise or wherever we are, however we daven, whatever we wear. Rabbeinu Bachaye, Rabbeinu Bachya, different pronunciations of his name. Here on one of our 3 psukim of Etzem Hayom Hazeh says, V'cho melacha lo ta'asu be'etzem hayom hazeh ki Yom Kippurim hu. Ma shehizkira katuv kan lashon kapara v'lashon etzem. The reason the Torah here juxtaposes the idea of atonement and the idea of etzem is mipnei shelo tomar kevan shelo hizkir korban b'parasha imein mikdash ve'ein korban ein Yom Kippurim mechaper. So that you not think that without a temple, without the sacrifices, there's no atonement. Lekach ba lomar she'ena kapara tluya bekorban v'lo b'shum davar acher ela itzu. I should have bolded this part. Ela itzumo shel yom mechaper v'yesh lo segula zo shehu mechaper uvilvad lashavim. So Rabbeinu Bachya here says to us, the Torah goes out of its way to describe Yom Kippur as etzem hayom hazeh, alongside the idea of atonement, to remind us that we don't need any of those trappings. We don't need the Beit HaMikdash. We don't need the Korbanot. I would argue again, we may not even need the Tefillah. The essence of the day is what atones. And now we've moved from Yom Hazeh to Itzumo Shel Yom. Yesh lo segula. It has this unique quality of atoning. And of course, he now adds, following the Rambam and following the position of Chachamim, uvilvad lashavim. There's still something we have to do. It's tshuva. It's not korbanot. Maybe it's not even tefillah. It's tshuva. There's something we have to do. But then the day takes over and does the rest of the work. And it seems to me that this move from hayom hazeh to itzumo shel yom mechaper that's happening in the medieval period is that we may be uneasy with a pure magical power to the day. Even though Rabbeinu Bachya says segula liyom zeh, there's something special about this day. But I think for the medievals, somehow it wasn't enough to say that there could be a magical day on the calendar. We have to define its essence. We have to understand what the day is about, what values it brings to the fore, so that at the very least, whether we're able to enact them on that day or not, we're meditating on them, we're identifying them, we're feeling a connection to them, we're unearthing the etzem hayom hazeh, the itzumo shel yom. If we just say Yom Hazeh Mechaper, then it's just about turning from 11:59 to midnight, or from the moment before sunset to the moment of sunset. We have to focus on Itzumo Shel Yom to recognize that there is an essence of the day that we need to unearth. And just by unearthing that essence of the day, knowing it and plugging into it, we can receive its atoning power. So what is that essence? We begin with the Ramban's commentary on these psukim. And where we're going to journey is the Ramban's description. Then I think the first 2 essential components of etzem, of itzumo shel yom. And then coming to the heart of what I think the idea of etzem is all about for each of us. So the Ramban helps us understand that etzem has a number of meanings. And here this is the middle of an extremely long Ramban. And here he focuses on one meaning of etzem that starts us on our journey to appreciating the power of this day. Not just the essence of the day, but the power of the day. Says the Ramban, V'chein nireh li od ki etzem kol davar kocho v'tokpo. The etzem of a thing is its power and its strength. We can derive this from phrases like kochi v'otzem yadi. What does the word etzem actually mean? Up until now, etzem hayom hazeh, we've mostly been translating as the essential of the essence of this day, or even just this very day, etzem hayom hazeh, on this very day, which doesn't have a quality to it other than the noticing the existence of the day. But what is etzem? Says the Ramban, it actually means power. And in kocho v'tokpo, we can hear the words, unetane tokef kedushat hayom. Let us give heed Let us give recognition to the power, to the tokef, to the etzem of the holiness of the day, the power of the day. So the first thing we're picking up on is that Vayhi be'etzem hayom hazeh, all the sense of focusing on Itzumo Shel Yom is not just recognizing the existence of the day, but the power of the day. Oz v'tatzumot, kochi v'otzem yadi, the might, the strength of my hands, strength and power. And the Ramban gives other examples. And now he explains what this has to do with our other association with the word. Uba'avor sheha'atzamot mosdot haguf v'tokpo yikaru kein. Because our atzamot, our bones, are the fundamental units, they're the kind of foundations, the essential scaffolding, skeleton, literally, and structure of our bodies. They're the things which give us strength. So that's why they're called atzamot. In other words, atzamot, meaning bones, comes from etzem, which means strength, because our bones are the things which give us strength. They're our scaffolding, our skeleton, our infrastructure. Here the Ramban is mentioning that etzem hayom is used not just for Yom Kippur, but as we mentioned also in this section in Emor for Shavuot, it's used, etzem hayom is used for these, ki ha'inyan bahem ba'atzmam lo b'davar acher nosaf bahem, shu ha'korbanot asher yakrivu bahem, because the power of the day is somehow embedded in the nature of the day and not the activities of the day. So etzem hayom hazeh now means not just the very day, but the power of the day, the essence and the nature of the day. And we still need to unpack what that is, but we know that it's the thing which gives the day its quality, its essential nature, its values, and its identity. So, what are those things? Let's continue on to the next source. The Rav spent a lot of time, Rav Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, spent a lot of time in his tshuva discourses trying to unpack the idea of Itzumo Shel Yom. Again, an idea that we recognize is a later development, not just Yom Hazeh, but Itzumo Shel Yom. And he really tried to answer the question we're asking. What is Itzumo Shel Yom? What is it about Yom Kippur? What is the nature of Yom Kippur that gives it its essential identity that we plug into on this day, whether we have sacrifices or tefillah or kittles or not? And he says, kapara is equal to the Itzumo Shel Yom on the one hand, right? Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper, hayom hazeh mechaper alechem. We know that the essential nature of the day is that it achieves kapara for us. And kapara is also equal to the honored and awesome name, right? What happened in the Beit HaMikdash alongside all the korbanot is that God's ineffable name was uttered, lifnei Hashem titaru. And in some sense, upon the uttering of that name, the purification and cleansing and atonement devolved, happened for all the nation of the Jewish people that were there in the temple courtyard or wherever they were far-flung around Israel and beyond. So God's name, God's essence, God's presence creates the kapara, and Itzumo Shel Yom creates the kapara. So, says the Rav, I think this is the transitive property. If B equals C and A equals C, Bernie, the math teacher, you can chat in if I got it right. If B equals C and A equals C, what is the conclusion? B equals A. If Itzumo Shel Yom is mechaper, and Shem hanichbad v'hanora is mechaper, then Itzumo Shel Yom is Shem hanichbad v'hanora. The holiness of the Itzumo Shel Yom is the holiness of the great and holy name. For this reason, the author of the Bnei Yissaschar writes that the Hasidic masters never used the appellation Yom Kippur. They referred to the day as Yom HaKadosh. So somehow what's baked into Yom Kippur, the Etzem Hayom Hazeh, the Itzumo Shel Yom, is feeling God's presence. It's connecting to God. That's perhaps why Etzem Hayom Hazeh shows up all around the Tanakh at moments of covenant. At Noach's story, at Abraham's story, at Pesach. These are the moments when we re-establish, in fact, one of the key places it appears in the rest of Tanakh is in Sefer Yoshua, and there's another appearance in Sefer Dvarim. At moments of covenant, when we actually dig in to our relationship with God and feel God's presence in our lives, That is Itzumo Shel Yom. Those are the moments that the Torah marks with the sense of Etzem Hayom Hazeh, Itzumo Shel Yom. And so Yom Kippur, its nature is that it's the day when we can feel God's presence manifest differently than Rosh Hashanah, where we coronate God as king. I think it's actually a day of more intimacy. Yes, incredible awe, but also intimacy. When we feel ourselves right next to God, right alongside God, renewing and reevaluating our covenantal commitments one to another. It's the day on which the service, although we're not focused on the service, was so centered around calling out God's name, that intimate connective act, yes, of God's awesome name, Hashem HaNichbad V'Hanorah, but of calling it out in the way that we would turn to one another and call each other's names and seek connection. So perhaps the first essential element of Itzumo Shel Yom, not simply because it's easy, but simply in a fundamental way, feeling the presence of God and connecting to God. That, of course, we can do. It's aided hearing Reb Eli's voice. It's aided putting on our white clothes. But it's an essential piece of the 10th of Tishrei that we can do wherever we are, however we're experiencing the day. Close our eyes and call out God's name. Feel God's presence. Ask ourselves what our covenantal relationship with God means to us. And we've embarked on step one of Itzumo Shel Yom. The second piece of the day is its historic anniversary. This is what Rav Hirsch points to when he talks about Etzem Hayom Hazeh in source 8. Rav Hirsch writes, Ki bayom hazeh yechaper aleichem. Hanoseh shel yechaper yachol liot rak ha'asor lachodesh. Remember, in the very beginning, we saw the translation in source 1 of Ki bayom hazeh yechaper aleichem. God will atone for you on the 10th day. And we've already now shifted to saying that the 10th day itself somehow atones. This is Rav Hirsch's point. Hanoseh shel yechaper, the subject of this sentence, which has its verb as will atone, is asor lachodesh. The 10th of the day is what atones. The essence of the day atones. Itzumo shel yom mechaper. Asor Tishrei. I'm going to read this in English, although the Hebrew is so beautiful. The 10th of Tishrei established at first the fact of atonement. Meaning, Yom Kippur wasn't just randomly chosen. The 10th of Tishrei wasn't just randomly chosen as the day for tshuva, as the day for Itzumo shel yom mechaper. Like all the other great truths of Judaism, it grounded the faith in atonement upon the foundation of historical experience. It wasn't just an idea, it's an anniversary. As a result, whenever it returns, it establishes in us anew the miracle of divine loving kindness. He's of course referencing here the Midrash, that Yom Kippur is the day on which the Jewish people achieved ultimate forgiveness and atonement for the sin of the golden calf. Our first national collective break with God. It took a number of cycles of Moshe's intervention and processes of atonement, but Yom Kippur marked the completion of that process. And it was the anniversary, the fundamental day on which we understood the possibility of atonement and forgiveness. And so when Yom Kippur comes around every year, the Itzumo Shel Yom Mechaper, because we travel back in time. We look at this calendar day, the 10th of Tishrei, and we say, what happened today? We achieved a rebuilt, renewed covenantal relationship with God, a sense of forgiveness and the possibility of moving forward together. So it builds upon the idea of covenantal connection from the Rav and says it's also a historical anniversary of a successful moment of achieving that, of creating that reconnection, not just that connection, but that reconnection. And so part of Yom Kippur, part of the Itzumo Shel Yom Mechaper is wherever we are, traveling back in time to that moment, trying to feel the sense of what it was like to be there then, to have felt a sense of broken faith, and to have journeyed onto the process of rebuilding and renewal, of seeking God's presence to be with us again, as we built a home for God, and as we journeyed into the wilderness with God at our side. So the second aspect of Itzumo Shel Yom is recognizing that this calendar day isn't arbitrarily chosen. It's a historic anniversary, an anniversary of the first successful experience of Kapara. So yes, Yom Kippur, it's Itzumo Shel Yom, is about feeling our personal connections with God, our covenantal connections. And yes, it's about commemorating an anniversary. But the Sforno begins us on to our third, and I think for me most significant aspect of Itzumo Shel Yom. The Sforno writes, V'chol melacha lo tasu ki Yom Kippurim hu. Ki ra'oi b'yom kazeh lifnot mish'ar asakim latet lev lahasig mechila v'kapara. Al hefech hein b'yom tzomchem timtzeu chefetz v'chol atzvechem tinugasu. You shall do no work, for it is Yom Kippur. For it's appropriate on a day like this to turn aside from other business and focus on achieving forgiveness and atonement. The opposite of, on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Yeshayahu's scathing critique of the Jewish people at that time, who paired their ritual fast, and we'll come to more of this in a little bit, who paired their ritual fast with ethical corruption, moral corruption. No, Yom Kippur is a day, of course, that we clear out. And the refraining from melacha is all about giving ourselves time to put ourselves into it. And here we see the beginning, I think, although he doesn't reference it explicitly for me, lifnot mishar asakim latet lev, to turn from all other business and focus ourselves, is about the sense of etzem as about self. In other words, it's not just about connecting to God. It's not just about moving into history, but it's about bringing ourselves to the day. The Itzumo Shel Yom is atzmi. It's myself. It's actually saying that I free up an entire day to do the work. Fast days are days of tshuva, but we go to work on those days. The idea that we invest ourselves in Yom Kippur, however we make of the day, the idea that we bring ourselves to a day and continue to consecrate a day which is entirely about introspection and reflection, and that we embrace the day off of work, the day of Isur Melacha, to be a day wholly devoted to trying to become our best selves, to slicha, mechila, tshuva, and kapara. That, for me, is the heart of Itzumo Shel Yom. It's atzmi ba'atzmo shel Yom Kippurim. It's the devotion of myself to the day. And I think here we can come back for a moment to the debate between the Chachamim and Rebbe. For the Chachamim, this is sort of sufficient. We put a little bit of ourselves into the day, we do our tshuva, and that paired with Yom Kippur is mechaper. But Rebbe says that there's something more, that actually the day itself atones, that we don't even really need to do tshuva on the day, that there's something even deeper and more fundamental to the essence of the day, its themes and its nature, that achieves atonement with our somehow connecting to it, but not even necessarily doing tshuva, but with our plugging into the values of the day that actually atones somehow on its own. What are those pieces? And here I want to come to what I feel is my most central thesis and argument, which is the idea of atzamot, of etzem, as the Ramban spoke about it, as meaning bones. What are bones? What are our bones? They're not just a source of strength. They're the reminder to us of connection, of linkage, of belonging to something bigger than ourselves, right? If atzmi, if myself is one etzem, is one bone, I'm completely lost without all the other atzamot, without all the other bones. I can't do anything when I'm by myself. When I'm atzmi, I'm completely and utterly insufficient and incomplete. I need to be part of a greater whole of atzamot, of all those other bones, in order to achieve anything. And Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper, the essence of the day, I think is about really pausing and asking ourselves what we belong to. And a couple of other moments of atzamot around the Tanakh will reflect on this more deeply. And this too, I think, helps us understand Rebbe's take. Because Rebbe's take is that the Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper, the essence of the day atones, even if you don't do anything on it. And here I want to argue that that's because the person who chooses to do absolutely nothing on Yom Kippur is actually swept along by being a part of the skeleton of the greater Jewish people. Now, that doesn't work if we all make that choice, of course, but we all have moments of checking out, of disaffiliating or disaffecting. And in those moments, what ultimately I think sweeps us along and keeps us connected is knowing that we're a part of that greater whole that's always ready to receive us back, and that's actually bringing us along with it. That inactive bone is still moving along with the skeleton as it walks forward on the journey. And so for Rebbe, what I want to argue is that Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper, for the person who doesn't do tshuva, because they are an etzem in the greater atzamot system, the person who doesn't do tshuva is still swept along by being part of a people, the ethic of whom, of Jewish peoplehood, is Rav Avi's teaching to us. Et achai anochi mevakesh. It's a people that seeks each other's welfare, that's focused on bringing everybody along and including everybody in the journey, whether they feel they're ready to be a part of it, whether they're checked in or checked out, they're a part of our atzamot. And this notion of atzamot being about connection to the greater whole is expressed in a couple of psukim, which I want to look at as we move towards our culmination and conclusion. In source 10, we find the beautiful pasuk, Kol atzmotai tomarna, Hashem mi chamocha. All my bones say, Lord, who is like you. Right? When we daven, pray, sing, cry out to God, how do we use all our bones? It doesn't really feel like I'm using my thigh bone or my hip bone in those moments, but we're part of something bigger. I actually think that the Kol atzmotai tomarna is kind of a vision of us being a part of a greater Jewish people that each in their own way proclaim who God is like you. We're a part of the Kol atzmotai, the entirety of the Jewish people. And it also reminds us how embodied our work as a Jewish nation and as individuals is. Part of the afflictions on Yom Kippur is actually to draw our attention to how much we need our bodies to do mitzvot, to achieve our vision and our goals as a Jewish people. Kol atzmotai tomarna. Itzumo Shel Yom, the essence of the day, is also reminding ourselves that we are physical beings. Yes, we transcend that in some ways and try to be angelic, but it's also a day that in feeling our hunger, we become sensitive to the bodily, physical needs that we all have and how taking care of our physical selves and sensing the need to ensure each other's physical welfare is so central to what it means to be a part of this covenantal community and of the covenantal community of all humankind. And of course, in these coronavirus days, thinking about the actions we need to take physically to ensure our physical welfare and realizing our interconnectedness and the fact that every choice we make impacts each other deeply, deeply physically is so much a sense of what we're feeling these days and what I think about in Itzumo Shel Yom, in the essence, in the embodied, in the emboned nature of this Yom Kippur especially. In Yeshayahu, in the Haftarah for Yom Kippur, we're told, Halo zot tzom evcharehu. This is the fast I desire. And the Navi goes on to talk about the fact that it's not just the ritual parts, but it is the ethical parts. It's all the things we do with our bodies. It's to unlock the fetters of wickedness, untie the cords, let the oppressed go free, break off every yoke, things we need our atzamot to do. We need our bones to do them, to share our bread with the hungry, to take the poor into our homes, to clothe the naked. And if we do all those things, we're promised in verse 8, Az yibaka kashachar olecha, your light shall burst through. When we call out to God, God will answer. And when we offer our compassion to the hungry, then our light will shine in darkness, our gloom will be like noonday. And then ultimately, Nachacha Hashem tamid, God will guide you always. God will slake your thirst. Then the thirst and hunger that we feel on the fast days will subside. Ba'atzmotecha yachalitz, and God will give strength to your bones. So ultimately, living an embodied and justice-focused Jewish life will come all the way back around to our own atzamot. And Itzumo Shel Yom is about recognizing the relevance of that circle, that the things we do with our bodies, not just ritual, but ethical, create a community of nourished and healthy and safe people. This is the Chilutz Atzamot, the strengthened bones that we pray for in the Birkat HaChodesh every month. This is the Chilutz Atzamot, the Atzmotecha Yachalitz. And I'll leave for your consideration just this spark of wondering of the relationship between Tzom and Etzem, between fasting and bones, between a successful pairing of the ritual starvation and hunger and its impact on our bodies and our essences and our sense of what it means to do justice, not just as individuals, but as a community. Think about some of the most famous bones in biblical history. Atzmot Yosef, the bones of Yosef that were never left behind. The sense not just of connectedness across community, but transgenerational connectedness. That we bring the bones of our forebears with us wherever we go. Their values, what they have imparted to us. All of that is Itzumo Shel Yom. It's a historical connection, a transgenerational connection. It's the Atzamot Yeveshot. It's a sense looking forward, that the vision of our redemption is about bones reconnecting one to another, growing flesh and growing life. That bones are the symbol of what it means to again feel a part of a greater whole and to again renew a sense of connected Jewish community, connected humanity. When we reach that, we know redemption is near. And if you look at the word atzum, which is going all the way back to the Ramban, the sense of what it means to be strong, etzem expressed through the sense of strength, no individual is ever atzum. In the entire Tanakh, it's always goyim atzumim. It's always groups that are atzumim or atzumot. You can never be atzum all by yourself, which is why Moshe in the Torah spends so much time going also back to the Ramban's very first example of the word otzem, meaning strength. Kochi va'otzem yadi. My strength and the might of my hand achieved all this greatness for me. That's a fallacy. Because otzem, etzem, strength and might is never just atzmi. It's my etzem as a part of greater atzamot. Not just the atzamot of all humankind, but the etzem of God. Because indeed, our etzem and atzamot are of one kind. God's etzem, God's nature is something different. If we look at the very last source, traveling to the Haggadah, and I also want to acknowledge a wonderful thought and teaching that Rav Ezer shared with me on Kol Atzmotai Tomauna, Hashem Michamocha. All my bones say, who is like you, God? Of course bones say, who is like you, God? Because God is completely disembodied. Bones can't understand what it's like to be God, because God doesn't need all that interconnectedness. God is one single unity. God's etzem is not like our etzem. Our etzem is dependent on all others, and our etzem is dependent on God's unique etzem. And we have this sense when we go back to the Haggadah and see that when God took us out from Egypt, the Midrash in the Haggadah tells us, Lo al yedei malach, velo al yedei saraf, velo al yedei shaliach, ela kadosh baruch hu bichvodo uve'atzmo. The ultimate etzem, the ultimate wholeness, the ultimate connected whole that we strive for is to reconnect our atzamot to the ultimate atzmo, which is God. So this is where we find ourselves, unpacking Itzumo Shel Yom, unpacking the strength of the day, the essence of the day, the power of Yom Kippur. All these pieces are, of course, enhanced by sitting in a sea of white, by pouring out our hearts together, by beating our chests in unison, by engaging in the process of focused tshuva. But actually, none of those things are essential to the day. Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper, alongside a process of tshuva, and maybe even, if we're willing to take Rebbe's radical position, maybe even without tshuva, Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper, The essence of the day atones. Not hayom mechaper, not just arriving on the day, but digging deep into the essence of the day. A day of feeling covenantal connection with God, a day of journeying back to all those etzems, to God as God's name that we utter, that close, intimate feeling that we can feel when we close our eyes and feel we're in God's presence. Itzumo Shel Yom number 1, the strength and power of the day that comes from feeling God's connection. The sense of recognizing our place in history, and that Yom Kippur is a historic day, an anniversary of a successful process of repairing, reconnecting, and reestablishing covenant with God, reflecting, journeying back, and holding that in our mind's eye. Part 2. Part 3, pouring ourselves into the day, setting aside the day wholeheartedly, putting aside malacha and avodah, putting aside distractions, and focusing on making the most of the day, however we spend it. Recognizing that each of those individual devotions and connections to the day only achieve their success when we see how interconnected we are and must be all to each other. In the very first days of the coronavirus, as we started to have daily phone calls with the Riverdale Jewish Community Partnership and with medical advisors, as we saw numbers begin to ramp up, wondered, worried, perhaps denied what was ahead, I still remember one of our medical advisors saying, yes, we'll need a lot of contact tracing capability. Yes, we'll need databases. Yes, we'll need health protocols. But you know what we really need? We need a list of all the vulnerable people in our community. And we need to start calling them every day. We need to know who's where and what they need and whether they have access to medical care. And when no one's able or allowed to come into their houses anymore, how they're going to be safe and healthy and provided for. That's what we need to do as our preparation to meet this pandemic. And it's reflected in the way, and I'm proud of our clergy team and the work that we've put in, as I referenced in an earlier drasha, to devotedly and dogmatically breaking Zoom rule number 1, that whatever we do in person, we also do virtually outside of Shabbat and Yom Tov, to that absolute commitment that our community is connected across that artificial divide of who's in person and who's at home. We can't be two skeletons, the ones that show up in person and the ones that remain at home. If we're not continually interconnected, none of us can move forward. We're divided, and the divided skeleton falls to the ground. At the funeral of our dear friend Mendel Trachtman, Zichrono Livracha, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Rabbi Fink shared a story that has stayed with me from those moments. Rabbi Fink, the rabbi of the Young Israel of New Rochelle, kept up a regular chavruta with Mendel, as did everyone whom he could convince, members of our clergy and community and so many others. And one of the most excruciating things for Mendel during the time of the pandemic, of isolation and quarantine, was losing those person-to-person chavrusas. Learning over the phone wasn't the same. Reaching out to connect through Zoom wasn't the same. Rabbi Fink related that he said to Mendel, as soon as the pandemic is over, I promise I'll be back. And Mendel said, O chavruta, o mituta. If people can't be together, what is life? Social isolation is a tremendous, tremendous curse. It's a terrible suffering. If we don't do everything in our power to alleviate it, to connect etzem to etzem, bone to bone, to be safely together however, wherever, and whenever we can, spiritual, social, or literal mituta, death, is what faces us on the other side. It's a matter of life and death. Yom Kippur will be different this year. There's no way around it. But we all have the possibility and the opportunity to feel Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper, to be atoned and to atone through the power of the day, through plugging in, through feeling God's presence, through commemorating the anniversary of our national forgiveness in the wake of the Egel HaZahav, the sin of the golden calf, to devoting ourselves wholeheartedly to the day, a day of thinking about our bodies, what we do with our bodies, and how we ensure the embodied health of ourselves and all around us, of our commitment to putting our hands to the work of justice and creating better safety nets and closer connections in our Bayit community, in our Bronx community, across our nation to Medinat Israel and across the world, and of recognizing that we stand or fall as a group of atzamot, of interconnected bones that grow flesh, grow life, and grow community, and grow the Spirit of God, which is breathed in each and every one of us. Ki vayom hazeh yechaper aleichem letaher etchem mikol chatoteichem. Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper. Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper. May we plug in to each other, with each other, about each other, and for each other. Pieces of a greater whole, feeling God's presence. And whatever we do on Yom Kippur, may we know we are a part of Itzumo Shel Yom, the power of that day, the connected bones and bonds of that day, ushering in a year of kapara, of atonement, of briut, of health, of ahava, of love, of kihila, of community, of mishpacha, family, of neshama, of spirit, of shalom, of peace. Shana Tova, we love you, every precious member of our Bayit. Shana Tova, Shana Tova.